couple of the major tests that I wanted to accomplish when I was comparing the Canon R50V and the Sony ZV-E10 were skin tones and low light. And what a better place to do it than this particular setting. See if you can tell a difference on which camera got which shot. When shooting in program auto exposure, I didn't see too much of a difference when it comes to skin tones. If anything, I prefer camera B, not only because it looks a little bit more realistic, but also it has a little bit less saturation. And I see the same thing here with a different angle and a little bit less light hitting our subject. Camera A tends to be a little bit more saturated in the skin tones, but I wouldn't notice this unless I put both cameras side by side. Camera B has a little bit more of a subtle saturated look to the skin tones, but here's the thing, in these low light hours, something changes between both of these cameras and how they pick up on that surrounding light. Pay attention to the white balance and how it shifts to a cooler tone with camera B, and we also get more of a purplish looking sky. Also notice the autofocus pumping in and out with camera B. Camera A does a much better job in not only its auto exposure, but also keeping the focus locked without much of that autofocus bumping that we were getting with camera B. But the image quality shifts back over to camera B when we get into this night environment and I crank both cameras' ISO up to 5000. When I overlay the images back and forth like this, you can see that camera B not only holds the color better, but it also lifts up those midtones. Now we have to remember that both of these cameras are very capable cameras, especially in different lighting situations. But there are subtle differences between both of them, and that's what we need to try to figure out. This way you can make an informed camera purchasing decision. This is not a biased review. This isn't being sponsored by Sony or by Canon. In fact, it's not being sponsored at all. Before I share with you which camera got which shot, I have some exciting news to share with you. Recently I was watching some old camcorder videos that were shot about 20 years ago, and it brought back a nostalgic feeling. There's something about that old look that just feels good. So I decided to make LUTs for both of these cameras, the R50V and the Sony ZV-E10, that mimic that camcorder look, and after a ton of trial and error, they are finally complete. And I'll leave those LUTs in the description in case you want to check them out. Also, I left free project files for both of these cameras in the description in case you'd like to download the footage that I got with these cameras and try them out in your editing software. And if by the end of this video you're still undecided about which one of these two cameras is right for you, I made 2 free quizzes on which camera or lens you should choose. The quiz will ask you specific questions and based on your answers, funnel you to the camera or lens that best suits your needs. Today, we're gonna be covering both of these cameras, how they perform when we're doing green screen work. I'm gonna put them both into an overhead configuration. We're gonna see how they vlog. We'll test out their different exposure settings. We'll test out their colors and their sharpness. I'll also test out these cameras as if they were my real estate cameras. But first, let's see how you scored. If you thought that camera A was the Canon R50V and camera B was the Sony ZV-E10, then you were right. For me, I wasn't 100% sure when I was checking out those skin tones, which one was which, other than a small hunch that I thought camera B was the Sony because it was a little bit less saturated. But as soon as we jumped into the low light hours and I saw that purplish sky and the autofocus pumping, that gave the Sony away for me. And then of course, when I switched both cameras over to ISO 5000, I saw how bad the Canon did and I knew that was the Canon. But the church shot with the minimal amount of light and my skin tones headshot example, they were both pretty close. Now, one aspect on these camera comparisons that we have to keep in mind is what lenses we are using. For this comparison, I used both cameras' kit lenses, the Canon RF18-45 f4.5 to 6.3 and the Sony 16-50mm f3.5 to 5.6. But I also used the Sigma 10-18mm f2.8 in their respective mounts. The price of the Canon R50V is $649, body only, and that's US, and $849 US with its kit lens. And it was released on March 26, 2025. The Sony ZV-E10 body alone costs $698 US and $798 with its kit lens, and it was released in July of 2021. Now, if you like videos like this one, make sure to like this video so I know to make more videos like this one. Also, don't forget to join the Film Alliance by subscribing. All right, let's talk about their image quality. As I spoke about earlier in this video, in this low light shot, you can see the difference in color science of each camera. The Canon has a cooler tone and the Sony ZV-E10 has more of a purplish hue in the skies. When I jumped inside to get a real estate shot, both cameras to me looked very similar, except when you look at the lights over the island. The color of the lights with the R50V look more realistic to me because they don't have that same hue that we get with the Sony ZV-E10. ZV-E10. The ZV-E10 looks more cinematic to me, but that's only due to that halation effect, and that's also due to the kit lens that I was using. And I also noticed the same thing with this night shot. I see a similar situation. Take a look at the lights with the ZV-E10's kit lens, which has a lot more of a bloom effect than we get with the Canon kit lens. But with that said, colors out of the Canon R50V are more muted and the shadows are more crushed, whereas the ZV-E10, I see a little bit more of vibrance with the colors in this shot. But when I got this very similar shot in a different lighting condition, both cameras really came close in their image quality. But I do see a little bit more of a blue hue or cool hue that you get with the Sony ZV-E10. And same thing with this vlog shot. I hope you start to see a difference between both cameras' image quality and how they perform. I wasn't very impressed with either camera, even though I was using the Sigma 10-18 f2.8. And as you can see, stabilization is not the best in the world with either of these cameras. In a super bright environment, I'm still seeing a little bit more saturation with the Canon over the ZV-E10, especially when that sunlight is hitting my face. And again here, I'm seeing a little bit of the same thing, a little bit more saturation with the Canon over the Sony when we look at those skin tones. Now, if you're anything like me, you may still be stuck on how bad that stabilization was in those vlog shots, and I'm with you. It's pretty crazy that both of these camera companies call these cameras vlog cameras, so you would think that the cameras would have better stabilization than they do, but it is what it is. But for tripod shots, I wouldn't really be able to tell the difference while I'm shooting in program auto exposure as long as there's enough light hitting the scene. In this shot, both cameras seem to have a very similar looking color, and they even hold the same amount of detail in the shadows. Now for this touch focus transition speed test, the ZV-E10 is slightly faster than the Canon. Sony has always had lightning fast focus speeds, so I wasn't really surprised here, but Canon is catching up fairly quickly. In this zoom shot, both cameras did very well, other than the difference in white balance that you can really see with the Sony. The Sony had slightly more shadow retention on the ground, but that's kind of expected with its slightly larger sensor. Both cameras did seem to tie in autofocus, but this is when we were shooting in the bright sunlight. Everything is pretty much already in focus because I was using a very high aperture, but I didn't see much focus shifting for this autofocus test. Both cameras paired with their kit lenses produce the same color sun and similar lens flares. Let me know which one you prefer in the comments. When it comes to their exposure settings, with both cameras set at 0.0 on the exposure compensation meter, I didn't really see much of a difference other than the color science. But when I stopped down a full stop to -1.0, those differences really start to become more apparent. And finally, when I set it to -2.0 on the exposure compensation meter, you can see that purplish sky that we get with the ZV-E10. Sky colors are always going to give away which shot is the Sony. The Canon skin tones are more saturated like we were seeing previously, and the ZV-E10 has more of a realistic looking skin tone in my opinion. It's because of this reason, if I was doing overhead shots, I would prefer the ZV-E10. In this actual product shot, in this controlled lighting environment, there is a big difference in the colors and the detail, as you can see here. Now, this one does come down to personal preference. Which one do you like better? The colors are also pretty similar with both of these cameras when you look at this color board, but I can tell the ZV-E10 lifts up those midtones slightly and the Canon is more saturated. Just like the product shot, the ZV-E10 lifts up those midtones and the Canon R50V has more of a saturated look. It does have deeper, darker shadows as well. I would prefer to use the Canon for macro shots because I feel like there's more contrast. Next, I did a sharpness test with both of these cameras. They both have a 24.2 megapixel sensor, so I was interested to see which one was sharper in this test. And lo and behold, the Sony ZV-E10 seems to have a little bit more sharpness and retains more detail in that D when we go back and forth like this. If you have any idea why this is, why one would be more sharp than the other, even though they have the same megapixel sensor, please let me know. The grip of the ZV-E10 is much better than the Canon R50V. It comes out a lot farther and allows me to actually hold onto the camera much more securely and comfortable than I get with the Canon. Both cameras do have mic ports, a headphone port, a micro HDMI port, and a USB-C port for charging, transfer, and live streaming. And the Canon has a smaller remote input port in case you want to do remote control. The Sony ZV-E10 uses the NP-FZ100 batteries, and the Canon R50V uses the LP-E17 batteries. Both batteries lasted about the same amount of time, which is about an hour and a half of on and off video B-roll. Also, both cameras have removable storage, but you do have to put the SD cards in the bottom where the battery goes, which could pose a problem if you have either of these cameras mounted on a gimbal or a tripod. The Canon's playback interface is much easier to use than the Sony's. I have owned the Sony's camera lineup for a while now, and I'm still having trouble with the playback interface that comes with these older Sony cameras. Also, the Canon R50V has a much more user-friendly interface where you can actually touch things on the display in the menu, and you can kind of navigate through the menu on the display, whereas the ZV-E10 you can only touch to track or to focus. One more thing to think about when it comes to their image quality is the Sony ZV-E10 is an 8-bit camera and it can only shoot in 4K up to 30 frames per second, whereas the Canon R50V is a 10-bit camera and it can shoot in 4K up to 60 frames per second. However, the 4K 60 that you get out of the Canon R50V is going to be cropped quite a bit. You already have a 1.6 crop with the Canon sensor, so on top of that you can add an additional 1.5 or 1.6 crop, I'm not 100% sure. But we're talking about almost a 3 times crop when you're shooting in 4K 60, and then one more layer of crop when you switch it over to its enhanced stabilization. So I'm not so sure I would even use 4K 60 with the Canon R50V unless they come out with a firmware update. In the end, both the Canon R50V and the Sony ZV-E10 have their strengths and their quirks. And after spending time with both of them in many different shooting scenarios, from the green screen to the product shots to the vlogging, I've learned that choosing between these two really comes down to what kind of shooter you are. The Sony edges out in sharpness, focus speed, and color control in certain areas, along with shooting in low light, whereas the Canon holds its own with a little bit more of a richer color, more saturation, and more realistic tones when you're shooting in the standard color profile. Neither camera is perfect, especially when it comes to stabilization, but for the price point and feature set, both offer a lot of value. Hopefully this video helped you figure out which one fits your style better, and you can make an informed purchasing decision. Because I own a bunch of Sony glass already, I prefer the Sony ZV-E10 even though it's an 8-bit camera. But I'm very optimistic with Canon and what they're doing with a compact camera like this, being able to shoot in 4K 60 and have more lenses being opened up to the Canon RF line like Sigma. Thanks for joining me on this comparison, and I'll see you in the next video. One of the most asked questions I receive is, which camera should I buy? I know that you want to make the right decision, and it is a big decision. You want to find the camera that best suits your needs and stays within your budget. Many of you know which camera might be good for you, but you need some guidance pinpointing it and feeling confident in your decision. That's why I made this course. I want to put my camera experience and knowledge into a compact and easy to follow format. This course is jam-packed with camera buying fundamentals that I guarantee you will carry with you through the rest of your camera journey. I base this course on all the things that I wish I had known or someone had told me when I first started out. From understanding different camera types and their features to matching them with your specific needs, this course covers it all. After finishing, I'm confident that you're gonna have clarity over every angle and aspect that you must consider when you're shopping for a camera. I'll guide you through my entire process, taking you 90% of the way there. This way you'll be well prepared to make your decision. This is essentially all the guidance that I would give my own brother if he asked, "Hey Joe, which camera should I buy?" Now I'm sharing that insight with you. I'll see you in the first module.